Yeah, so that addresses, or I'd like to address that with 2 points. The first is the continuity of the committee. I think that already there are 20 college councils. It's tough for us to act as a group and for us to come to a consensus, and ultimately in cases where there are slight disagreements, the financial directors end up voting. In positions where, from one council you might have the internal controls director or the vice president, from another council you're going to have the Senate rep, from another council you're going to have the financial director, from another council you're going to have the president. It would become very dilutive to the committee itself, and there won't be that continuity, and that's what I was talking about with the framers' intent of making sure that the second, third, fourth round of appropriations can always be improved. And I really do think that students across campus in different organizations that are applying for funding are best served by a committee that can make that continuous judgment over serving councils in the way of going past the first step of giving them the voice of representation to the financial directors, the second step of allowing presidents to come. And once again, I don't think myself, obviously I hope you guys trust me, but I would trust future financial directors to act in the best interest of the Senate of College Councils and not suppress a voice for any reason other than they're not trained or well equipped with the knowledge to represent. Ultimately, I think that was just kind of a check and balance system in case there's a freak accident or somebody really isn't qualified but wants to sit on this committee. And quite frankly, I don't think you could stop the financial directors from exercising that power right now. This just outlines it in the Constitution. Blake has been gracious enough not to, and I don't think he's really dealt with that problem. But in the future, dealing with that problem is meant to be more of a check against freak accidents than to give the financial director any more power than he or she deserves. Also, your legislation doesn't reflect it, but Crystal and Blake have signed on as sponsors of the legislation.
Yeah, so you spoke about the Senate reps not being elected to the executive board. Most councils, but I know for a lot of they are also to the point that it would be Senate's obligation to recognize these standing representatives from the various assemblies, federal, small, house. Why not? The third point would be how could they stand representatives will eventually process.
So there have been situations in the past that when, especially earlier on in the appropriation process, where members of the committee are not well aware of the qualifications for giving appropriations to an organization. The simplest example I can think of is, this can easily be prevented with training, but sometimes people do stick to their guns on this, where there's a political organization, and Senate's, one of Senate's things that outlines our Constitution is that we're supposed to support students in academic matters and cultural matters, but we're not supposed to take an official funding stance on political issues. That's something where somebody who hasn't gone through the appropriate training would know that. To address your executive board question, yes, Senate reps sometimes do sit on the executive board, but obviously Senate is a college council of college councils of 20, and I think that the vast majority don't have Senate reps sitting on the executive board, even the ones that do, and even for other executive members, including the vice president, who technically is above the financial director in the hierarchy, don't gain fiduciary responsibility when the financial director isn't able to perform their actions. Is something funny, the phrase that I'm using. Fiduciary responsibility means the responsibility of actually taking care of the money of the organization and being able to have the power to allocate funds as well, and essentially the investments of the organization. And ultimately being able to represent your voice, your college council's voice, is something that I don't think should be taken lightly enough to be able to give it to just anybody else in the executive board, except somebody who has direct authority over the financial director, can veto their actions, and should sub in for them when they're not able to perform their duties. So it's just a consistent message. And I mean, you say that U.S. what was it, Federalist Papers or something?
No, I'll say the Federalist model. So I mean, you're telling me that the Senate of College Council has control over who represent a council.
That's the status quo, yes.
On financial matters.
That's the status quo.
You're not going the U.S. or the state Senate is the Federalist.
Yeah, but also Senate subcommittees. There's no such thing as proxy voting on a Senate subcommittee in the U.S. Senate. And I think that, quite frankly, I'm taking this first step because I want to see how it pans out. And I think that it's a conservative step in the right direction of being able to give some flexibility to councils. As it is now, there is no such flexibility. So the framers obviously had some intent because they obviously thought, or I hope that they thought about the fact that they're only limiting this vote to financial directors and only financial directors. And I think expanding it one step is the best first step.
Last time we talked about maybe adding what it means by approval. If you wanted to have a
Yeah, and so what I'm saying is I think ultimately there are some things that the financial director can't foresee until he's actually in that situation, he or she is actually in that situation. So I'd like to keep it open just for those situations. Ultimately, you guys elect the financial director, so hopefully it's not, power trip, nobody gets to vote. And even in those cases where the financial director does have that power, they have no power to tell any sitting financial director that they can't vote. So this is just for the cases of a proxy vote, which a proxy vote should have certain qualifications since they haven't gone through the proper financial training and should meet certain criteria that I think are subject to that year's financial director's eyes and should be standardized across the board.
Just a point of historical clarification, I'd like to point out that both Bhargav and I have served as Senate Rep, and Bhargav was actually chosen as the Senate Rep of the year. So I believe that he's uniquely qualified to make this evaluation. That's
Senate Rep of the year.
So, you spoke about what kind of
Yeah, so the question was, what are the qualifications that it takes to be a proxy voter, essentially? And so I think that's a good point, Blake. Maybe I can draw upon a more personal experience. So I think as a Senate representative my sophomore year, I wouldn't have been qualified. Even having gone through some financial training, I would have liked it to go to somebody with a better world view. Last year's president of the Undergraduate Business Council provided the same training as I have been provided if we were to sub in. Let's say we were both trying to sub in as a proxy voter. I still think that somebody who goes through the formal training of understanding what you can and can't appropriate money to, what you can and can't appropriate copies to, how we usually allocate money, the strategy of appropriations itself, how many organizations, being on board with from round 1 to round 4 with the financial directors is something that all you can be caught up with, but it's not something that you understand the value of unless you're uniquely in that position of a financial director who's been through that process, or hopefully in the eyes of the president who has a much bigger world view of how different organizations under their college councils, since most of us are umbrella organizations for our organizations within our councils, and then also organizations that don't fit under colleges, how funding affects them, because presidents are often in charge of policy matters for their college and also running events, whereas Senate reps are not in charge of running events. They're simply there to represent students on policy matters, which is kind of one of the key clarifications. I think presidents have that unique ability to look at how funding affects events, how requests for certain things, and how the operations of certain events run, and ultimately use the financial training that I would give a proxy voter or a future financial director would give a proxy voter to the best of their opinionated abilities.
Well, but my actual question is really conditional.
Sorry, I think I mentioned that. Just to clarify, it's just, talking to me for, 10, 30 minutes, whatever it is, getting a good sense of how that year's financial committee has been making decisions, what the strategy is, and then also the specific, constitutional and kind of common law rules that we follow.
And that's Student Association for the School of Information. But to build upon that comment, for our particular school, we have 4 students who are co-directors of our student organization, and we basically, we consider ourselves co-directors, and we don't actually have a formal title except what Senate of College Councils has, put us in the boxes to do. And so we all feel, any 4 of our officers feel confident in handling any job that should come along. So what I'm to understand is that means only 2 of our 4 officers, the financial director and the person who's been assigned the title of president, would be capable of attending these meetings and making these decisions. But what I hear you saying is that basically all that person needs to do is sit down with Seneca College Council's financial director for 10 to 30 minutes, and all of a sudden they have all they have the necessary training to make a proxy vote. So for my school, this model doesn't work very well because we have such a small number of people, and we have essentially a horizontal pecking order and no bureaucracy to worry about. This doesn't help us. I mean, in this case, we want to say, all right, the financial director cannot be there because they've got class, and so we want to appoint 1 of 3 people rather than having it be just the president, because in our case, the president might be busy too. So I'm curious as to whether or not there's any way to, tweak the legislation or make a friendly amendment to allow for colleges, that have a really, really small council, to allow them to accommodate whoever the financial director appoints.
Yeah, so I see your point. So there are 2 things that I'm getting out of that message. One is you have a very good point about qualifications, and it seems like in that case, all 4 of your members would be qualified to make this decision. They can all sit through the same 10 to 30 minute, which is an arbitrary number, by the way, that I chose, amount of training, and be able to represent your college well. However, I don't think it's fair to say that you're at a disadvantage for being a smaller council, because there are 2, under this model, there would only be 2 people for every council, whether it's business council of 100 people or 4 people of your council, that could technically vote. And I think the reason for that is, aside from qualifications, where there might even be one of the other 2 co-directors who's qualified to represent, there's the message of consistency that I keep trying to reiterate. Ultimately, you don't want too many people sitting on this committee. You don't want, one day this co-director, the next day that co-director. And the reason for that is when people come back to appropriations, they often have experiences in the past that can't be trained, and this kind of working in a group to ultimately determine how much you're allocating towards organizations, that it can't be learned unless you're in the room. And for the sake of consistency, which is why I believe the framers of the Senate Constitution are only currently allowing financial directors to vote, was for the sake of consistency. Though it's a committee that has no rotations, nobody comes in and out, it's the same faces every single meeting, and that's why I want to keep it to 2 representatives maximum.
No, and I understand that. What I meant.
While the president in title, I guess, qualifications seem to be very title-based, but I feel like while consistency is a good thing, and I think that can be achieved through representatives, I think competency, representation, and availability are also things you should consider in your legislation. I mean, it sounds to me that aside from a worldview, as you call it, that the presidents have that no other officer or financial director has, that they also go to a training. I would disagree that only the president has that worldview. Personally, I guess most of the evidence I see presenting against, say, a elected Senate rep taking that position has been anecdotal at best. As a Senate rep, I run events as well, so I'm very involved in college and I see how some stuff works. And at the end of the day, you still have to have a approval to say yay or nay whether that person is qualified. So if an elected representative of council wants to serve in proxy because the financial director is busy, and the president either is too busy organizing or working with officers on legislation or programming, I mean, why should that be cut off?
Yeah, and so I don't think that my main point, I hope it hasn't been perceived as anecdotal. Ultimately, it's from the root of why you were elected. Even if it's circumstantial that the Senate rep has event planning experience, that's very circumstantial. As a Senate rep, I was a sophomore coming in out of my freshman year, no event planning experience. I later got that experience. Some Senate reps are not going to have that experience. Some financial directors and presidents are not going to have that experience. But ultimately, it's from the root of why they were elected. And I think that only the president is elected to be able to fulfill the financial director's duties when they're not able to fulfill it, even if not from a council point of view, from a Senate point of view.
Thank you. We're seeing the business in the world.
This is Pontiac UTNR Students Association. Just wanted to make a couple points. With this bill, we're just trying to propose some way to make council representation at appropriations meetings a little wider. We're not getting the representation we really would expect just from the financial directors. And to open it up to a proxy vote, you have to draw the line somewhere where most councils, most of the time, won't be able to use their president if needed, and they will